Back in October of 2022, I made a video on my first-hand impressions and experiences on Royal Enfield motorcycles that were out at the time. Since then, the company has released a few other bikes here in the US. The Scram 411, Hunter 350, and their most recent launch, the Super Meteor. Yes, the Shotgun and the new Himalayan model are both a thing, but unfortunately the US market is not going to get them for God knows how long. Anyway, I drove 2 hours to this dealership in Fort Wayne, Indiana, so that I could make a video on these 3 motorcycles and take a look at some of the other brands this dealership offers. They're known as Werks Powersports, based in Fort Wayne, Indiana, carrying a handful of different motorcycle brands, featuring Triumph, Beta, Moto Morini, and of course, Royal Enfield. At the time of filming this whole thing, Werks has been in the process of bringing in Indian motorcycles and the Polaris Slingshot into the mix, all while renovating the place to accommodate for those new additions. Check them out, a lot of cool bikes, and the employees are very down to earth and personable. I need to point out that I'm not being paid to make this video. However, the owners of Werks and I have I guess you could say a partnership thing going on in the future in regards to some of the content that you're going to be seeing on this channel, like with Project Royal Enfield and whatever else that we end up coming up with. And I want to make this clear to everyone. I am only wanting to do this as long as I can be honest and give my genuine opinions and thoughts, because at the end of the day, credibility is everything, and I'd like to believe that you guys know me by now and know that I try my absolute best to make videos like this as unbiased and honest as I truly can be. There will be a link in the description for their website. I would check them out, especially if you're in the Midwest. They have a lot of really cool stuff going on, and events will be posted on their Facebook page, so keep an eye out for that. Included in the description is an additional link to my Patreon account in the event you would like to help further support my content, so I'm able to produce stuff like this on a quicker time frame. So of course I won't be doing a full-length review of these bikes. That sort of thing takes hours upon hours of riding. Instead, like before, I'm going to give you guys my first impressions and overall first experiences on these 3 motorcycles. And like before, we're going to do this by working our way up in size, starting with the Hunter 350. The Hunter joins the fray of utilizing that same 350J series single-cylinder engine that is used on the Meteor, the Classic, and if you live in other parts of the world, the Bullet 350. Visually, it's a more modern-looking bike compared to the others, though it doesn't necessarily steer away from having that old-school vintage charm about it. The color on this particular bike is known as Rebel Blue. It comes in 6 different color schemes, some with flat paint, while others have a nice glossy finish. Though all of the Hunters come with the frame, engine, exhaust, handlebars, all that stuff is finished in black, with very minimal amounts of chrome or really silver throughout. I think it works perfectly for the bike. Having those things finished in chrome would kind of look off on a bike like this. The switches and controls are very familiar with Royal Enfield, and the instrument cluster or dash is carried over from the Meteor 350. It's a simple thing, really, but it works incredibly well. Bright, it's easy to read while riding. I have 0 issues with that. The digital gauge gives you typical info that you would expect from most motorcycles, though unlike the Meteor, this does not have the Tripper navigation installed from the factory. You can have it installed if you want, or maybe if you want to throw on one of those tachometers instead, that's cool too. honestly, I have used the Tripper navigation once in the past. It's okay, but it's not something I would ever pay for personally and have it installed because it's nowhere near as useful as a decent phone mount and using whatever your preferred GPS is. Which I had to do because I know virtually nothing about the roads of Fort Wayne. So bear with me if it feels like I don't know where I'm going, because in reality, I have no idea. When I first took off on the Hunter, I noticed one immediate difference. The bike handles completely different. It's less relaxed compared to the Classic and even that of the Meteor. It's more twitchy in movements on the front end when manipulating the handlebars, and even if you shift your body around while riding and taking curves, it's far more responsive. It makes perfect sense because the Hunter has a completely different shape. The wheelbase is shorter, it has smaller wheels, and it weighs 400 pounds, which is about 30 less than the Classic, I want to say. Let's now talk about power, because it is somewhat of a topic of controversy. Well, okay, if you've ever been on any of the 350s before, then you do know what to expect. This is obviously not going to be that much different. Let's be realistic. It is not a fast bike. It does not try to be whatsoever. It's arguably even underpowered compared to most other 300cc bikes on the market. In fact, I would say it's even slower, in some cases far slower, than some other bikes with smaller engines. But at the same time, no one is buying any of these 350s for raw speed and power, or to race some random guy's clapped out Chevy Cobalt. Yes, I've had this happen to me before. Someone tried to race me on my Classic 350 in a yellow Cobalt. I don't know why, don't ask me, but it has happened for some bizarre reason. The Hunter, after all, is a single cylinder that pulls just around 20 horsepower. With modifications, you can push out another 5 horses, if not more. But whether or not you decide to go that route with mods and upgrades is entirely up to you and how you plan to use the bike for travel and fun. That being said, I did notice that the Hunter is a little bit torquier, a little bit faster in acceleration. Not by leaps and bounds, but still enough to notice. I would imagine that this is very well because of the weight reduction and overall geometry of the motorcycle. It is able to hit 75 miles an hour. That is the bike's top speed, exactly the same as the other 350s, which makes the bike excellent for city travel, rural areas, countrysides, anywhere where a speed limit is around 60 and under. The bike performs excellent. It excels in things like that, as most small cc motorcycles should do. Where the Hunter struggles is anywhere past 60. It takes all of its might to reach its top speed, much less 70 miles an hour. American highways, depending on where you live, this type of travel is not going to work for you. Where I live here in the Midwest, it more or less depends on which highway I take. If I take one where the speed limit is, say, 65, but everyone is going at a minimum of 80 miles an hour, I know this is not the bike to take on that type of road. Also bear in mind, if you take a stock Hunter 350 on a highway and it has any sort of upwards incline, you're going to have some trouble maintaining your speed. At most, it seems as if the Hunter is no different from the Meteor and Classic in the sense that its sweet spot is really around 45 miles an hour to maybe 65 at the very most. Any higher and the bike just doesn't really seem all that thrilled to be pushed to those speeds. Maybe after a break-in period or two that will change things, but I really don't have any way of knowing. So yeah, Highway Demon the Hunter is not. If that is a form of travel that you intend to do often, unless your highways have actual speed limits and not suggestions, this is more than likely not the right fit for you. The clutch lever as well as the shifter all work magnificently. The engagement point is stupid easy to figure out, and the shifts are perfect and smooth as butter. It's a 5-speed, it doesn't have a clutch assist, it doesn't have a slipper clutch. It's really totally unnecessary on a bike like this anyway. The clutch pull isn't heavy on the hand whatsoever, and the transmission is very forgiving in the event you downshift a tad too early. I would be interested, just out of sheer curiosity, to know what this bike would be like as a 6-speed. You might say, Foxxy, that's silly. But it can't be as ridiculous as the CF Moto's Papio, a 125cc mini moto with a 6-speed. I mean, it's different, but I kind of like it. It's quirky, it's weird, and that's kind of me in a nutshell. The Hunter's handling, like I said, is twitchy compared to its counterparts being far more relaxed, but it's still a very comfortable, stable ride. It has a natural upright stance for me. I'm slightly leaned forward, but not enough to where it's like awkward. It has mid controls, which is my favorite type of setup on motorcycles. The suspension is totally fine for what it is. A little bit firm on the rear, but nowhere near bad enough to really be an issue, especially on our famous Midwestern potholes. The Hunter's seat is more comfortable than I really expected it to be. It's far better, in my opinion, than the stock seat on my Classic. It just fits better for me personally. I could easily ride this bike for hours and hours and be totally fine. I could also whip this bike around in ways I couldn't do necessarily on my Classic 350. It's so nimble and agile. Low speed turns and curves are done without really any effort. It's still a heavy bike for its size, sure. I mean, a Virago 250 weighs around 100 pounds less, and a Honda Rebel 300 is around 50 pounds less than that of the Hunter. But the Hunter doesn't feel heavy at low speeds because its center of gravity is just so spot on. I like the Hunter a lot, and for the price it's really hard to complain. $4,000, slightly more depending on what color you decide to go with. But really, $4,000 makes this an incredibly affordable, attractive motorcycle. And I don't feel like Royal Enfield cheaped out on the quality to make it a more affordable, approachable option for potential buyers, whether it be first-time riders or people that have been riding for decades. It still has a USB charger for your phone, it still comes with a center stand and features the dual-channel ABS, and it has a really nice instrument cluster. Unlike the other 350s, this comes with alloy wheels with tubeless tires. By the way, look at the tires. Very aggressive and ridiculously nice. God, I wish my Yamaha Bolt had these tires on them. A quirky looking motorcycle that is the Scram 411 for sure. It's basically a stripped down, heavily stylized Himalayan with the goal of appealing to the scrambler crowd. If you saw my original video, you might remember me being very skeptical of the Himalayan. Then the more I was riding that bike, the more I liked it. Still not my favorite bike, but I understand its cult-like appeal. But I have a problem with the Scram. When it first came out, I was both annoyed and excited. Excited because this goofy-looking bike is more my style. I like interesting, weird, quirky-looking bikes. And the Scram doesn't look like anything else here in the US, at least that I've seen. I know that's hipster AF, but screw it, I really don't care. The part that really bothers me, actually annoys the piss out of me, is that the Scram came out far too late. The Himalayan, correct me if I'm wrong, came out in America around 2018, and the Scram somewhere around October of 2022, which was around the same time that there was talks of the Super Meteor and the new, bigger Himalayan. The Scram right off the bat was deemed obsolete and pointless by many, and some dealers attribute that to its low sales here in the US. Honestly, I've never once seen this bike out in the wild. It's only ever been at dealerships. People don't care about the Scram here by me, and that's sad because it's a super cool looking yet bizarre scrambler. But with that rant out of the way, the Scram, of course, borrows the same engine, the gearbox, the frame, and gas tank from that of the Himalayan. However, it doesn't have the engine guards. It doesn't have a windscreen, the center stand, or the instrument cluster that the Himalayan has. The Scram comes in 7 different color options, my favorite being white flame, but this graphite red ain't too shabby looking. The hand controls, dash, all that's carried over from the Meteor and other bikes with very minor differences, which is fine. It really doesn't need anything proprietary to this bike alone. In fact, it makes being able to find and access parts far easier. Everything easily accessible and very familiar without questioning what button does what. I have no complaints about that. The Scram 411's engine is a little bit more powerful than that of the 350J series, as you would hope, but it's not by a whole lot. It's still a single cylinder. It's air-cooled with support from an oil cooler. It offers only 24 horsepower, which is just 4 higher than what you would get with the 350s. But the thing is, that power is immediately noticeable. More on the low end, really. You can get up to speed at a quicker pace, and unlike the 350s, this can achieve a top speed of 80 miles an hour. 85 plus if you're going downhill, and weigh as much as like a featherweight MMA fighter during weight cut, but that's neither here or there. Still not the best for highway, but it's more doable if you had to. For me, I could take the Scram out anywhere I needed to where I live in the Midwest and be completely fine. Highway or city, but I know that doesn't apply to everyone. Performance parts are wildly available. If you were to love this bike and just craved more power out of it, there are big bore kits, cam upgrades, even a high performance ECU, just to name a few of the very many things you can do to the Scram, and the Himalayan for that matter. I was pretty happy with the power delivery of the Scram. The throttle's not touchy at all. The torque is a little punchy, but not anywhere near enough to be overwhelming, which honestly makes this bike excellent for beginners because it's not intimidating at the slightest. In a weird way, the Scram is really one of the safest motorcycles I've ever been on, while at the same time still having enough power to be a daily rider. I'm kind of shocked that schools around here don't utilize bikes like the Hunter and Scram for their riding academies. I feel like they would be an excellent, cost-efficient option. The operation of the clutch on the Scram is just as nice as the other Royal Enfield motorcycles. Engagement is simple, very easy to figure out, no issues there, and the gearbox itself is just wonderful. It's a simple 5-speed gearbox with no surprises. Simple yet effective is the name of the game, and they've done an excellent job here. I love the clutch and the transmission on this bike. It's not hard to figure out and master, and again, it's forgiving in the event of downshifting a little bit too early. The transmissions on these Royals in general, I feel, is a subject that is not talked about enough. I've been on bikes that cost nearly 3-4 times as much as the Scram that don't operate nearly as well or as smooth throughout the gears. Let's talk about rider comfort. It's fabulous. My god, the Scram is an infinitely more comfortable bike than the Himalayan. I was not a big fan of the seat on the Himalayan. I did not find it comfortable at all for long periods of time, which is typical for most entry-level adventure bikes. The Scram, I could ride this bike for hours and be completely fine. The seat contours to my lovely rump just magnificently well. Rider posture is upright, with mid-controls like I prefer. It's entirely natural to the feel and the body position. You know how I mentioned that the Hunter was somewhat twitchy compared to the relaxed nature of the other 350s? It's very much the same, in my opinion, with the Scram over the Himalayan. For very similar reasons. It's obviously a smaller bike than its bigger cousin, and with that is a reduction in weight. 407 pounds on the Scram versus the Himalayan's 438. The only negative thing I noticed is that the suspension left a little bit to be desired. When I would hit the occasional bump or pothole, I did feel it far more than I remembered with the Himalayan, but not enough like my Benelli TNT, where hitting a bump felt like a sledgehammer going to your upper B crack. The Scram suspension will just wake you up more than it will paralyze you. But of course, that is a simple thing that can be addressed if you so choose to. I have to say, you know, the Scram surprised me the most. I didn't really know what to expect from the bike because of my experience with the Himalayan, I guess. I figured that I wasn't going to be that into the Scram, but it's funny how it ended up being one of my favorites in the Royal Enfield lineup. I love this quirky little weird bizarre bike, and I could very easily see myself owning a Scram in the future and modifying the hell out of it, because that's just what I do. But maybe one day I'll do that, who knows. Royal Enfield touts the Super Meteor 650 as the quintessential cruiser, and they couldn't have described it any better. Visually, this bike screams classic, old-school cruiser. It actually reminds me a lot of the older Yamaha V-Stars and Honda Shadows. It takes me back to my very first bike, which was a weird Canadian imported 85 Yamaha Virago 500. So, when the Super Meteor was first announced and finally dropped, everyone was raving about it. All over online, Facebook pages, shops here in the Midwest that carry the brand, glowing reviews all around. I, however, seem to be the only one hesitant of this bike from the get-go. Why? For those who don't know, I have a very rare autoimmune disease that I've been dealing with for about 3 years now, leaving me with ridiculously painful open wounds on my legs and feet. My left foot is still healing to this day, and it's presented a major issue with bikes with forward controls. You see, I can't really bend my left foot nearly as much as the average healthy person, which can affect my ability to shift. But I'm going to touch more on if that affected me riding this Super Meteor in due time. The one that I'm demoing here is Astral Black. I don't know about other countries, but black and chrome is still a huge thing here in the US, so I'm sure this color option will do extremely well here. The Super Meteor comes in 7 different color options, 2 of which come with a windshield and a more premium touring seat that features a backrest. The one I'm riding, they added a couple of things like touring foot pegs, a windshield, LED indicator lights, and the touring mirrors, which for the record are leaps and bounds better than the stock ones. Whether they're worth the very high prices, well, really up to you. The Super Meteor is utilizing the same engine and gearbox, all that fun stuff from the other 650s, the Interceptor, and the GT. However, the frame is different. The gas tank is bigger. It features upside-down front suspension. The headlight has LED. And the wheels are alloy with tubeless tires. All of these changes and additions make the Super Meteor feel like a far more premium motorcycle compared to the other 650s that the company offers. It still keeps with that old school look and mentality, but it's far more modern than the other 650s. The power on the 650 is night and day different compared to both the Hunter and the Scram, as you would expect. It's a twin cylinder instead of a single, and it's able to push around 47 horsepower, which is about double that of the Scram. It's immediately felt the moment you crack on the throttle. It is far more torquey, far quicker, and obviously far more powerful than that of the smaller bikes in Royal Enfield's lineup. As a result of that increased power, makes it a far more versatile motorcycle. Highway travel, even long distance touring, is achieved without any complaints from the engine. You can cruise at 65, 80 plus for hours without putting really any stress or strain on the motor. The bike technically can go 100 miles an hour, if not higher, but for most American roads, you really don't have a good reason to go that fast anyway. But it still can be done very easily. I pushed the bike out of curiosity twice, doing 0 to 60s, and I was very happy with the result. I got a 0 to 60 time around like 6.5 seconds, and even with my busted ass foot. And that's plenty fine with daily riding, getting on and off highway ramps. Passing power is definitely there, both for city and highway. At the end of the day, I don't feel the bike necessarily needs a bigger engine or more power to get the job done. It's pretty damn great from the get-go. Still tons of performance parts are being made for the 650s, and if I had one, of course I'd be modifying the bike as well. But for those who want a stock bike that is capable of handling most daily tasks, this isn't an engine to scoff at. It's perfectly capable, and then some. Of course, because it shares with the other 650s, it also has a 6-speed gearbox instead of a 5 on the smaller bikes. The clutch is a little bit heavier, but it's still very easily manipulated, and to find that engagement point is still really easy. Also, cool thing here, the Super Meteor comes with adjustable levers, which is great because I tend to like my levers a little bit closer to the grips than most people probably do. Okay, so my fears of not being able to control the shifter on the Meteor was completely unfounded. I had zero problem shifting on this bike, even with my very limited range of motion. Shifts were perfectly found. I never ran into an issue of a false neutral or missing a shift because I wasn't able to lift my foot enough. Every single shift grabbed perfectly. I did have a slightly harder time finding neutral, but again, that is more of a problem on my end than it has anything to do with the bike itself. So consider me extremely impressed that the Meteor was able to adapt to my lack of range, where other bikes with their forward controls could not. That does pose a very fair question though. How come this bike doesn't have a heel-toe shifter installed from the factory like the regular Meteor does? You know what my biggest negative thing is about this bike? The seat. On a stock one. Not the upgraded one that I mentioned earlier. The very base model seat is absolutely atrocious. It is contoured in a way where, at least for me, I'm putting all of my weight directly on my tailbone. I didn't notice it at first, but after like 20 minutes of riding, that area was just hurting like crazy. I did sit on the other Super Meteor with that premium seat, and I did not have an issue with it at all. It was far more comfortable, but the stock seat, no, absolutely not. I couldn't do it. If you don't have a problem with the stock seat, that's fine. For me, it's borderline unbearable. Outside of that, I was plenty comfortable with the body positioning and the ergonomics, controls. Everything felt totally natural. You have a tripper nav. The speedometer really isn't that much different than the last bikes I've talked about. It's all familiar, but in all the right ways. I felt at home on the Super Meteor. I felt like it's a bike that a ton of people are going to fall in love with because it's simple yet effective. The suspension, I never felt needed adjusting or upgraded. It was perfectly fine for me. I was able to throw my weight around and still corner very easily. And that's kind of a weird thing because this bike is technically considered to be heavy for its size. It's, I think, 530 some odd pounds, but you don't feel that weight, whether it be in low speed situations or just from stationary at a stop sign or a stoplight. I like the Super Meteor. Yeah, it's not my favorite, I'll be honest with you. I still love the GT650 far more, but you gotta understand, I fit that market of those who love cafe racers and for those who don't really tour. But I appreciate the Super Meteor and know damn well that it's going to fit the US market far better than the other two 650s that Royal Enfield provides here in the US. It's still affordable. The cheapest color variant on the Super Meteor is $7,000. The most expensive being $7,500, and again that comes with the windshield and the far better seat. All of these Royal Enfields, by the way, are backed with a 3-year unlimited mile warranty and roadside assistance. And I could say, as far as my classic 350 goes, I have never had an issue with the bike as far as reliability. It's fired up every time, never had an issue with it, and it's just really, really nice. I would say that if you have any interest in any of the bikes and Royal Enfield's lineup in general, they're worth checking out in person. I love them. I'm thrilled that more and more people here in the US are finding out about them. Like when I ride my classic 350 around, people are always asking about it and smiling when they see it. People get a kick out of it, and I enjoy that. It gets people more interested in the brand, and more people wanting to know, where can I get my hands on a bike like that? I'm a lover of all things motorcycles. I have 4 bikes myself, all different brands, all completely different style. Royal Enfield is a favorite of mine because when I ride it, it's a more pure motorcycle riding experience. No distractions from high-tech displays, no rider modes or fancy electronics. It's all just you, the bike, and the road. Simplicity in form, but not barren in its execution. It captures what got me into motorcycles in the first place, even as a young boy from Chicago. Bikes were my passion and love, and Royal Enfield captures that essence for me to a T. So with that, I'm going to wrap this video up by thanking you all so much for watching. A huge thank you and shout out again to Werks Powersports of Fort Wayne, Indiana for being super cool with me making this video and with our future partnership. Check them out if you're ever in the Fort Wayne area. They got a lot going on with sales on their bikes, bringing in new products like with Indian and Slingshot, events and expos coming up. So to wrap up again, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. I'll see you next time. And of course, ride safe, or at least try to.